the hotel maid let the trembling boy sleep on the lobby couch, tucking her own scarf around his small shoulders. The vampire king emerged from the stairwell darkness, eyes fixed on his son's peaceful face. She thought she was saving a lost child, but she'd just claimed the attention of an immortal father who'd been searching for someone worthy of his heir for 300 years. Now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you. Elena had been polishing the same marble column for 3 minutes when she noticed the boy, a small figure tucked against the far wall near the grand staircase, where the amber lighting barely reached. And her first thought was that he looked expensive in the way only the guests from the 13th floor ever did, all silk and cashmere, and that particular sheen of wealth that came from never having touched polyester in your life. Her second thought was that he was shivering hard enough that she could see it from across the lobby, his thin shoulders trembling beneath what looked like a designer shirt that probably cost more than her monthly rent, but was doing absolutely nothing against the December cold that seeped through the Grand Minerva's historic windows every time the wind picked up. She knew she should call Ms. Chen, her supervisor who had already written her up twice this month for talking too long with guests and taking unauthorized breaks. But the kid looked maybe 8 years old and completely alone, and something in her chest twisted painfully because she knew that particular brand of alone, had felt it herself at 13, when the social worker had explained that her baby brother would be going to a different foster home and there was nothing she could do about it. The memory still had teeth even 6 years later. Still woke her up some nights with the phantom sound of Marcus crying for her. And maybe that was why she found herself walking across the lobby with her cleaning cart forgotten behind the concierge desk, her sensible work shoes silent on the polished floor. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly when she got close enough, crouching down so she would not loom over him. And up close, she could see that his lips had gone pale, and his eyes were this startling gray that seemed too old for his face somehow, ancient and knowing in a way that made her skin prickle. "You are freezing," she continued, when he just stared at her without blinking, those gray eyes fixed on her face like he was memorizing every detail. "Where is your mom?" The boy did not answer, did not even move except for the shivering, and Elena felt her heart crack a little wider because she recognized that silence too, the kind that came from being small and scared and having learned that words did not always help. "Okay," she said gently, unwinding the purple scarf from around her neck, the one her abuela had knitted before she passed, soft wool that still smelled faintly of the lavender sachets Elena kept in her tiny apartment closet. "No talking. That is okay. I am Elena. You can stay here where it is warm." She wrapped the scarf around his shoulders and the boy flinched at the first touch, but then went very still, and Elena could feel how cold his skin was, even through the expensive shirt, could feel the fragility of his bones like a bird's hollow architecture. She should definitely call Ms. Chen now, should follow protocol and locate the parents and absolutely not get attached to another child she could not save. But instead, she found herself settling onto the velvet couch that sat behind the concierge desk, the one they kept there for elderly guests who needed to rest, and patting the cushion beside her. The boy stared at the couch for a long moment, and then at her face, and then back at the couch before he moved, careful and deliberate. Climbing up onto the burgundy velvet and sitting rigid at the far end, like he was waiting for her to change her mind and send him away. Elena pulled her thermos from her work bag, the dented metal one that kept her coffee hot through the long night shift, and unscrewed the cap to release a curl of steam that smelled like chocolate and cinnamon. "I have hot chocolate," she offered, pouring some into the cap that doubled as a cup. "It is probably not as fancy as what you are used to, but it is warm." She held it out and the boy looked at it like it was something alien, something he had never encountered before, and very slowly reached out to take it. His fingers were ice cold when they brushed hers, and Elena had to suppress a shiver of her own, had to ignore the way the temperature seemed to drop even further when he was near. The boy held the cup without drinking, just staring down into the dark liquid, and Elena found herself talking to fill the silence the way she always did when she was nervous. "I work here at night," she explained, keeping her voice low and soothing like she was gentling a spooked animal. "It gets pretty quiet after midnight, so if you need to stay here until your parents come back, that is fine with me. I could use the company, honestly." She was rambling now, but the boy had not run away yet, so she kept going. "I had a little brother once," she said before she could stop herself, and immediately regretted it, because she never talked about Marcus, never let herself think about the way his small hand had felt in hers the last time she had seen him. "He was around your age, maybe a bit younger," she continued, because stopping now would be worse somehow. "I lost track of him when we got split up in the system, and I always wondered if someone was making sure he had a warm coat and hot chocolate when he needed it." The boy's head came up at that, and he looked at her with those two old eyes, and for just a second, Elena thought she saw something flicker in them, some emotion struggling to surface. But then it was gone, and he was just a cold, shivering child again. She smiled at him anyway, and mimed drinking from an invisible cup. And after another long pause, he lifted the cap to his lips and took a tiny sip. His eyes went wide, and he looked down at the chocolate like it had performed a magic trick, and Elena felt absurdly pleased that she had surprised him. "Good, right?" she said. "My abuela's recipe, well, sort of. I add extra cinnamon because that was Marcus's favorite." She watched the boy take another sip, and then another, and something in her chest loosened slightly, because at least she could do this, could give this one child warmth and sweetness, and a safe place to rest, even if she had failed Marcus so completely. The boy finished the chocolate and handed back the cap with careful precision, and then did something that made Elena's breath catch. He curled up on the couch with his head on the armrest, and pulled her scarf tighter around his shoulders and closed his eyes. Just like that, trusting her completely, and Elena felt tears prick her eyes, because when was the last time anyone had trusted her with something precious? When was the last time she had not felt like a failure, who lost everyone she tried to hold on to? She pulled off her jacket and draped it over him like a blanket, and his lips curved into something that might have been almost a smile, and then he was asleep, his breathing so quiet, she had to watch his chest to make sure he was actually breathing at all. Elena settled into the desk chair where she could keep watch over him and tried not to think about Ms. Chen's inevitable fury, or the fact that she was probably going to lose this job too. Tried not to calculate how many shifts she would have to pick up somewhere else to cover next month's rent and her student loans from the nursing degree she had never finished. None of that mattered right now because this child needed her, and she was not going to fail again, was not going to be the person who walked away when someone small and scared needed help. She did not know that in the stairwell darkness something else was watching, had been watching for 47 minutes with eyes that could see perfectly in the absolute black, eyes that belonged to something that had not needed to breathe for over 8 centuries. She did not know that Lucian Nightshade stood motionless in the shadows, with his hand half raised because he had been about to retrieve his son and erase this woman's memory, the way he had erased dozens of others, the way he always did when Theo wandered and some well-meaning human tried to help. She did not know that he had frozen mid-motion when Theo had let her touch him, had let her wrap that ridiculous purple scarf around him, and had not pulled away. And Lucian could count on one hand the number of times his son had allowed physical contact in the last century. She did not know that Lucian was experiencing something dangerously close to hope for the first time in 300 years of searching, 300 years of failure, 300 years of watching his son exist in frozen isolation while the curse slowly strangled both of them. She did not know that he was watching her tend his child with a gentleness that made something in his dead chest ache, watching her sacrifice her job security and her warmth and her family heirloom scarf for a boy she did not know. Watching her and thinking she touched him, he let her touch him. In 300 years of searching, No one has ever. Do not hope. Hope is poison for immortals. But maybe this one. She did not know any of this, and so she simply sat guard over the sleeping child and ignored the way the temperature kept dropping, and the shadows in the stairwell seemed darker than they should be, and the prickling sensation on the back of her neck that told her something was watching. She ignored it all because the boy was finally warm and peaceful and sleeping with her scarf clutched in his small fists. And in that moment, Elena Vasquez made a choice without knowing it was a choice, made a decision that would alter the course of her entire existence. She decided this child mattered more than the rules, more than her job, more than her fear. And in the darkness, Lucian saw that decision written in every line of her body and felt the calculation shift in his mind from, how do I erase her, to how do I keep her? And the difference between those two thoughts was the difference between ending a story and beginning one. Lucian had been standing in the shadow between the elevator and the stairwell for 20 minutes, watching Elena Vasquez scrub at a scuff mark on the marble floor that would never come out because it had been there since 1924. And he was trying to decide which approach would work best when she suddenly stood up and looked directly at where he was hidden in darkness that should have been impenetrable to human eyes. He went very still in the way only the truly dead can manage, no breath or heartbeat to give him away. But she kept staring at that spot with her head tilted, like she was listening to something just beyond her range of hearing, and he realized with a jolt of surprise that she could sense him, even if she could not see him. Interesting, he thought, and stepped out of the shadows into the amber pool of lamplight, watching her jump and press one hand to her chest. I apologize for startling you, he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended because he had not used it much in recent weeks, had been spending most of his time in silent observation of his son's unprecedented progress. I am Lucian Nightshade, Theo's father. I wanted to thank you for your kindness the other night. He watched her eyes go wide, and then narrow in quick succession, watched her process his appearance and his approach, and decide within 3 seconds whether he was a threat. And he found himself oddly invested in which category she would choose. She chose suspicion, but not fear, chose to stay where she was instead of backing away, and he felt that dangerous flutter of hope again. Your son, she said slowly, and he could hear the question in it, the unspoken, where were you when he was freezing in the lobby? Your son is beautiful, she continued before he could explain. He has your eyes, and something in Lucian's chest that had not moved in 8 centuries suddenly clenched because no one had said that to him in over 100 years. No one had looked at Theo and seen the resemblance that proved this child was his. He wanted to say something profound, but all that came out was thank you, and it sounded pathetically inadequate even to his own ears. Elena was studying him now with that same intense focus she had given Theo, and Lucian made himself stand still under the scrutiny, even though every predator instinct he possessed was screaming at him to take control of this situation, to use his considerable power to bend her will to his needs. He could do it easily, could slide into her mind like water and rearrange her thoughts until she wanted nothing more than to care for Theo, could make her believe it was her own idea, and she would never know the difference. But Theo had curled into her scarf and fallen asleep in her presence, and if Lucian manipulated her now, he would never know if that response was real or manufactured, would spend eternity wondering if he had found the answer, or simply created a convincing forgery. So instead, he did something he had not done in 3 centuries of searching. He told a version of the truth. My son has not spoken in years, he said, watching her face for the fear that usually came with this admission, the horror or pity or worse, the clinical curiosity. Has not truly smiled, has not shown interest in anything or anyone, until you. Her expression shifted, but not to horror, shifted instead to something that looked almost like recognition, like she understood that particular helplessness. What exactly is wrong with him? She asked. And there was no judgment in the question, just genuine concern. I am not a doctor. I am not qualified to help with something medical. Lucian had prepared for this question, had rehearsed a dozen different explanations that were all technically true while revealing nothing, but standing here in the amber light with this woman who had wrapped his son in lavender-scented wool and given him hot chocolate like those were reasonable solutions to an 8th century curse, he found himself saying something close to honest. Qualifications failed him, he admitted, and heard the bitterness in his own voice. Credentials failed him. Every doctor and specialist and therapist I could find, I tried everything. But you succeeded by simply being kind. That is what he needs. She was still watching him with those dark eyes that missed nothing, and he wondered what she saw, wondered if she could sense the wrongness that clung to him like a second skin. "And what do you need, Mr. Nightshade?" she asked quietly, and the question caught him so off guard that he answered without thinking. "I need my son to live," he said. "Truly live." The silence that followed felt like it stretched for hours, even though it could not have been more than a few seconds, and Lucian realized he had revealed far more than he intended, had let his desperation show like an open wound. He should retreat now, should take back control of this conversation, but Elena was nodding slowly, like what he had said made perfect sense to her. "I understand," she said finally. "I had a brother, I already told Theo, and I was not there when he needed someone. I failed him completely." Her voice went rough on the last words, and Lucian found himself taking a step closer before he could stop himself. Found himself wanting to offer comfort, which was absurd, because he was a vampire king who had orchestrated wars and toppled kingdoms, and he did not comfort weeping humans. But she was not weeping, was just standing there with her shoulders straight and her chin up like she was daring the memory to break her. And he respected that kind of strength. "I would like to hire you," he said, because that was safe territory, because money was a language he understood. $10,000 a week to serve as Theo's companion during the night hours. You would read to him, play with him, simply be present. No questions asked. He watched her absorb the number and saw the exact moment it registered as absurd, saw her eyes narrow again with new suspicion. "That is too much money," she said flatly. "What is the catch?" Lucian could not help the small smile that tugged at his mouth, because she was right to be suspicious, right to question, and he liked that she did not simply accept what he offered. "The catch is that I am desperate," he said, which was true. "The catch is that my son responded to you in ways he has not responded to anyone in longer than you can imagine, which was also true. The catch is that I will pay anything, do anything, to see him heal." She was quiet for a long moment, and he could practically hear her thinking, could see her weighing her options. "How long?" she asked. "1 week trial," he said immediately. "If it does not work, if Theo does not continue to respond, we part ways, and you keep the money regardless." "And if it does work?" she asked. "Then we negotiate a longer arrangement," he said. Elena walked past him to the window, and Lucian turned to follow her movement, turned just enough that he should have been visible in the mirror that hung behind the concierge desk, the ornate gilded thing that reflected the entire lobby in perfect detail. She was looking out at the December night, at the snow that had started falling in thick, wet flakes, and he could see her reflection perfectly in the window glass, could see the way she was worrying her bottom lip with her teeth. "I want to understand what is wrong with him," she said without turning around. "If I am going to help him, I need to know what I am dealing with. You cannot just throw money at me and expect me not to ask questions." Lucian felt the familiar urge to control rising in his throat like bile, felt the need to simply compel her agreement and be done with this negotiation. But he swallowed it down. "He has a developmental condition," he said carefully, choosing each word like he was navigating a minefield. "The specialists call it selective mutism, paired with a failure to progress normally. He should be growing, changing, learning, but he is frozen at 8 years old in every way that matters." It was close enough to the truth that he did not feel like a complete liar, far enough from it that she would not run screaming. "And you think I can help with that?" she said, still not looking at him. "I think you already have," he replied. I think he let you touch him, and that has not happened in so long I had forgotten it was possible. I think he drank your chocolate and smiled, and those are miracles to me. She turned then, and he saw the eviction notice folded in her back pocket, saw the way her shoes were worn through at the heels, saw the exhaustion that came from working double shifts and still not making ends meet. He had not intended to notice these things, had not wanted to see her as fully human with human problems and human vulnerability, but he saw them anyway and felt something uncomfortably like guilt. I will do it, Elena said finally, and Lucian felt relief flood through him so intensely it was almost painful. But I have conditions, she continued, and he tensed again. I want to know if something I am doing is not working. I want you to be honest with me about his progress or lack thereof, and I want you to treat me like a partner in this, not just hired help. Lucian stared at her, because no one had made demands of him in longer than he could remember. No one had looked at him and seen anything other than power and wealth and danger. And here was this human woman in a worn uniform with calluses on her hands, asking him to treat her as an equal. He should say no, should establish from the beginning that he was in control, but instead he found himself nodding. Agreed, he said. We start tomorrow night. Come to the 13th floor at midnight. Suite 1313. She nodded and turned to gather her cleaning supplies, and Lucian knew he should leave now. Should disappear back into the shadows before she noticed more than she already had, but something made him linger. Elena, he said, and she paused. Thank you for that night with the scarf and the chocolate, for seeing my son as a child who needed help instead of a problem to be solved. She looked at him for a long moment, and he wondered what she saw, wondered if she could sense the predator beneath the expensive suit. He is easy to love, she said simply, and then she was walking away toward the supply closet, and Lucian stood frozen in the amber light, trying to remember the last time someone had used the word love in connection with his son. He turned to leave and caught his own reflection in the mirror, except there was no reflection, just the empty lobby and Elena's back disappearing around a corner. And he realized with cold certainty that she had been standing at an angle where she could have seen the mirror, could have noticed his absence from the glass. He moved to the stairwell where Theo was waiting in the shadows, the purple scarf wrapped around his shoulders like armor, and pulled his son close. Did you see her? Theo signed in the language they had developed over decades of silence. Did she agree? Yes, Lucian signed back. She agreed. You will see her tomorrow night. Theo's face did something complicated, something that might have been hope or fear or both, and he pressed his face against Lucien's chest in a rare gesture of affection. Lucien held him and looked back at the lobby where Elena had disappeared and thought about reflections and lies and the way she had demanded partnership like it was something she deserved. He thought about the eviction notice and the worn shoes and the way she had said Theo was easy to love, and he realized with uncomfortable certainty that he was going to have to be very careful because this woman could destroy them as easily as she could save them. In the lobby, Elena was putting away her supplies and trying not to think about the way Lucian Nightshade had appeared from nowhere like he was made of shadows, trying not to think about the moment when she had glanced at the mirror and seen only her own reflection where two people should have been. She told herself it was the angle, told herself she had imagined the way the temperature dropped when he was near, told herself the pale exhaustion in his eyes was just worry over his son and not something stranger, something wrong. She told herself all of this and almost believed it, but when she walked to the elevator and looked back one last time, she could swear she saw two figures in the stairwell darkness, one tall and still as death, one small and wrapped in purple wool, and neither of them casting even the faintest shadow. The penthouse suite on the 13th floor was nothing like Elena had expected, was not the cold, sterile space she had imagined, but instead a strange collision of Gothic elegance and lived-in warmth, floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the winter city like a kingdom laid out for viewing. Antique furniture that probably belonged in museums sitting next to modern bookshelves crammed with everything from leather-bound first editions to paperback fantasy novels. The library where Lucian had directed her that first night smelled like old books, and the vanilla candles she had started bringing because the space felt too cold otherwise, too much like a mausoleum, and Theo had been waiting for her in an oversized leather chair with her purple scarf wrapped around his shoulders, like he had not taken it off since that first night in the lobby. She had brought a stack of picture books from the public library downtown, had grabbed them almost at random because she had no idea what an 8-year-old who did not speak might like. And when she held up the first one with its bright illustrations of a mouse on an adventure, Theo had stared at it for so long she thought he was going to refuse. But then he had climbed down from the chair and settled on the floor at her feet, looking up at her with those ancient gray eyes, and Elena had started reading. Her voice had felt too loud in the quiet space, too intrusive, but she kept going through the whole story, and when she finished, Theo had touched the book cover with one finger, like he was testing whether it was real. The second night, she brought different books and a deck of cards and taught him to play Go Fish, even though he could not ask for cards verbally, so they developed a system of pointing and nodding, and on the third night, she made the mistake of trying to do animal impressions to go along with the story about a farm, and her cow sound was so terrible, so absolutely awful, that Theo had made a sound she had never heard from him before. It took her a moment to recognize it as laughter, high and bright and shocked, like he had surprised himself. And the book had fallen from her hands because she was too busy staring at this child who was giggling at her ridiculous mooing. In the next room, she had heard something crash, and then Lucian had appeared in the doorway, looking like he had been struck, his face doing something complicated that she could not read. And he had stared at his son laughing for a long moment before turning and walking away without a word. Elena had not understood the significance then, had not known she was witnessing something that had not happened in over a century, had just been pleased that she had made Theo smile. The nights started to blur together in the best way, started to develop a rhythm that felt like family, even though Elena knew better than to let herself think that word. She would arrive at midnight and Theo would be waiting, sometimes in the library and sometimes in his bedroom, which was its own kind of heartbreak, a space decorated for a child from another era with toys that looked like they had never been played with, sitting in careful rows on shelves. There was a train set from the 1920s still in its original box, and a rocking horse with a real horsehair mane and tin soldiers arranged in battle formation, all of it preserved like a museum exhibit. And the first time Theo had pulled down the box of soldiers and actually played with them, Elena had felt tears prick her eyes. She taught him to make paper airplanes, and they had races to see whose could fly furthest across the library. She read him, The Velveteen Rabbit and the Little Prince, and watched him trace the illustrations with careful fingers. She brought hot chocolate in her thermos every night, and he would drink it slowly like he was savoring something precious. She noticed things, though, things that made her skin prickle with unease, even as she told herself there were reasonable explanations. Theo never seemed to have a heartbeat when she checked his pulse during their games, or maybe she was just bad at finding it. Maybe his heart rate was unusually slow. He never ate the cookies she brought, even though he would accept them and hold them, and eventually they would disappear. But she never saw him actually put food in his mouth. Lucian only ever appeared after the sun had fully set, and he was always gone before dawn started to gray the sky. But maybe that was just his work schedule. Maybe he had business that kept him on strange hours. She told herself these things, but she also started researching, started spending her lunch breaks at the public library, looking up the Nightshade family in Boston historical records. What she found made her stomach drop, made her question her own sanity, because there were photographs from 1924 of a Lucian Nightshade who looked identical to the man she knew. Not similar, but identical down to the small scar above his left eyebrow. There were records of a Nightshade family going back to the 1700s, and in every generation there was a Lucian, always just one, always looking the same in the photographs that existed. She told herself it was a family naming tradition, told herself the resemblance was just strong genetics, told herself she was being ridiculous, but the doubt had planted itself in her mind like a seed. On the fourth night, Elena arrived to find Lucian in the library instead of Theo, standing by the window looking out at the city with his hands clasped behind his back in a pose that seemed military, seemed ancient. "Theo is resting," he said without turning around, "but I wanted to thank you for what you have been doing." Elena set down her bag and studied his back, the perfect tailoring of his shirt, the way he held himself like royalty. "You do not need to thank me," she said. "I love spending time with him." The words were out before she could stop them, and she saw Lucian go very still. "Love," he repeated, and his voice was strange. "You love him." Elena felt her cheeks heat because she had not meant to admit that, had not meant to reveal how deeply this child had embedded himself in her heart in less than a week. "He is easy to love," she said. The same thing she had said before. "You have raised an incredible kid." Lucian turned then, and there was something raw in his face, something that looked almost like pain. "I have done very little," he said quietly. "He has been like this, frozen, for longer than you can imagine, and I have been helpless to change it. But you, in 5 nights, you have given him more progress than I have seen in—" His voice caught, "in so long." Elena wanted to ask how long, wanted to push on that statement that felt like it was hiding something enormous, but Lucian was looking at her with such naked gratitude that she could not. She crossed the room to the bookshelf to put away the books from last night, and reached for the top shelf where she had been organizing things, but it was too high and she had to stretch on her toes. Lucian appeared behind her so silently she did not hear him move and reached up to help, his hand brushing hers as he took the book, and Elena gasped because his skin was ice cold, corpse cold, impossible cold. He pulled back immediately, and she turned to find him watching her with an expression she could not read. "You are freezing," she said, and it came out almost like an accusation. "Are you sick? Should you see a doctor?" The corner of his mouth lifted in something that was not quite a smile. "No doctors," he said. "I am simply cold-blooded." It was clearly a joke, but it fell flat, and they stood there in awkward silence until Theo appeared in the doorway, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, and the moment broke. The pattern continued, and so did the strangeness. So did Elena's growing certainty that something was deeply wrong, even as she fell more deeply in love with this bizarre little family. She started noticing the way Lucian never ate or drank anything in her presence, the way his eyes sometimes caught the light and reflected it back like an animal's, the way the temperature would drop when he entered a room. She noticed that Theo cast almost no shadow, even in direct lamplight, that he could stay absolutely motionless for unsettling lengths of time, that he never seemed to need to use the bathroom or get hungry at normal intervals. She noticed and she catalogued, and she did not ask because asking meant risking answers she was not ready to hear, meant potentially losing access to Theo, who had become the center of her world in a terrifyingly short time. She found herself thinking about him during her day shifts at the hotel, found herself planning activities and bringing little gifts, found herself using the ridiculous paycheck Lucian gave her to buy Theo things he might like instead of paying down her debts. Her supervisor, Ms. Chen, had stopped threatening to fire her because apparently someone had made a substantial donation to the hotel and requested specifically that Elena be kept on staff. And Elena knew without asking that it had been Lucian. She should have been angry about the manipulation, but instead she felt grateful because it meant she could keep seeing Theo, could keep watching him slowly wake up from whatever frozen state he had been in. On night 7, she brought him a set of watercolors, and they painted together, his careful, precise strokes next to her chaotic splashes. And when he smiled at her over his painting of a purple wolf, she felt something in her chest crack wide open. On night 9, she taught him to play checkers, And he beat her 3 games in a row with a strategy that seemed far too advanced for 8, and she wondered again about his actual age, about the ancient quality in his eyes. On night 12, Lucian joined them for story time, and sat in the chair across from where she and Theo were curled on the couch, and she read The Little Prince, while feeling Lucian's gaze on her like a physical weight. When she got to the part about being responsible forever for what you have tamed, Theo reached out and touched the page, his first voluntary interaction with an object she had not directly handed him, and Elena's voice caught on the words. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear, the city wrapped in fresh snow and holiday lights, and Elena had spent too much money on a gift for Theo, even though she knew it was foolish to get attached, knew this arrangement had an expiration date. She had found a stuffed wolf in a vintage toy store, soft gray fur and amber glass eyes, and something about it had felt right. She wrapped it in newspaper because she could not afford proper wrapping paper, and brought it to the penthouse at midnight, her heart hammering because she was nervous in a way she could not explain. Theo was waiting in his usual spot, and Lucian was there too, standing by the window as always, and Elena held out the lumpy package. "Merry Christmas," she said. "I know it is not much, but I saw this and thought of you." Theo took the package carefully and unwrapped it with the same precise movements he did everything, and when the wolf emerged, his eyes went wide. He held it up to the light and stared at it, and Elena waited for some reaction, any reaction, and then Theo looked directly at her and spoke for the first time. "Mine," he said, his voice rusty and small but clear, unmistakable. "Mine." The word hung in the air like a bell, and Elena felt tears spill down her cheeks because he had spoken. This child who never spoke had said a word, and Lucian made a choked sound from across the room. She looked over to see him staring at Theo with an expression of such shock and hope and terror that she nearly went to him, nearly crossed the room to offer comfort. But then Lucian was moving toward them. "Say it again," he whispered, kneeling in front of his son. "Please, Theo, say it again." Theo clutched the wolf to his chest and looked from Lucian to Elena and back. "Mine," he repeated, and this time he pointed at Elena with his free hand. "Mine." Lucian's face did something that might have been a smile, or might have been a sob, and he pulled Theo into his arms, and Elena saw it happen, saw the moment the curse cracked. Theo's fingernails grew visibly longer, just a fraction of an inch, and his hair lengthened slightly around his ears, and the change was so subtle she might have imagined it. Except Lucian saw it too, because he went rigid and pulled back to stare at his son's hands. "You are growing," Lucian breathed, and his voice was full of wonder and terror in equal measure. "You are actually growing." Elena did not understand what was happening, did not understand why a tiny bit of growth would cause this reaction, but Lucian was looking at her now with an intensity that made her want to step back. "You gave him back something I thought was lost forever," he said. "How do I repay that?" Elena tried to smile through her tears. "You let me keep seeing him," she said. "That is all I want." It was a lie and she knew it. She wanted answers, wanted to understand what was wrong with these people she was falling in love with. But she was also terrified that asking would break whatever spell had allowed this moment to happen. Lucian stood and moved to the window, and she could see the tension in his shoulders, could see him processing something enormous. In his arms, Theo was babbling now, not words but sounds, happy nonsensical sounds as he played with his wolf, and Elena sat beside him and marveled at the change. That night after she left, after she had hugged Theo goodbye and felt his small arms wrap around her neck for the first time, after she had walked past Lucian, who watched her with eyes that burned, she stood in the elevator and let herself acknowledge the truth she had been avoiding. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with the Nightshade family, something that defied natural explanation, and she was in too deep now to walk away even if she wanted to. In the penthouse, Lucian stood over his sleeping son and watched the subtle changes, the fingernails that were fractionally longer, the hair that had grown a quarter inch, the first physical aging in 124 years. He thought about Elena's tears when Theo spoke, thought about the way she had said mine like an answer to a question, thought about the curse that was cracking under the weight of her love. He thought about vampire law that said humans who knew too much had to be turned or killed. Thought about the rival clans who would sense the curse breaking and come to investigate. Thought about his own desperate need to keep this woman in his life forever, by any means necessary. "I will give you eternity with him," he whispered to the empty room, "whether you agree or not." And the promise felt like a vow and a threat all at once. Elena had the photographs spread across the library table when Lucian arrived that night, old newspaper clippings and census records and grainy images from the Boston Public Library archives, and she watched his face go carefully blank as he took in the evidence of his impossible existence laid out like an accusation. She had been sitting there for an hour, working up the courage for this confrontation, had spent Christmas Day in her apartment staring at these same documents and trying to find a rational explanation that did not exist, had finally accepted that the only way forward was through the truth, no matter how terrible it might be. "You are a vampire," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "He is a vampire. You let me fall in love with him knowing I might run when I found out, knowing that learning the truth could— What? What exactly happens when I find out what you are?" Lucian closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them again, she saw something that looked almost like relief, like he had been waiting for this moment, and was glad it had finally arrived. "Yes," he said simply. "I am an 847-year-old vampire king. Theo is my son cursed at age 8, both physically and mentally frozen as punishment, when I refused a marriage alliance with a rival vampire clan. The curse states that he cannot age or develop until he bonds with a human mother figure who chooses him freely without knowing what he is, and you are the first in 3 centuries to break through." Elena felt the room tilt sideways and gripped the edge of the table to steady herself, because hearing it confirmed was different than suspecting, was different than letting herself imagine impossible things in the safety of her own mind. 3 centuries, she repeated numbly. He has been 8 years old for 3 centuries. 124 years, Lucian corrected, and his voice was flat like he was reporting weather. He was cursed in 1901. He has not spoken or smiled or shown any emotional development since then, until you wrapped him in your scarf and gave him hot chocolate and treated him like he mattered. The anger came then, hot and righteous, because she understood what he was saying, understood the trap he had laid for her. "You knew," she said, standing so fast her chair fell backward. "You knew that telling me the truth would ruin everything? That if I rejected him now, the curse would what? Solidify? Lock him like that forever?" Lucian flinched, and it was the first time she had seen him show anything like weakness. "If you reject him now that you know what he is," he said quietly, "the curse becomes permanent, and he will be frozen at 8 years old for the rest of eternity, which for vampires means forever in the most literal sense." Elena felt bile rise in her throat because that was monstrous. That was a curse designed to be unbreakable, designed to ensure that any human who got close enough to help would be bound by guilt and horror into staying. "And you were going to let me fall in love with him," she said. "You were going to let me bond with him, and then what? Tell me the truth and blackmail me into staying? Or were you just going to turn me into a vampire against my will and solve all your problems at once?" She saw the answer in his face before he spoke, saw the guilt and the desperation and the terrible calculation, and something in her chest shattered. "I considered it," Lucian admitted, and there was no excuse in his voice, no justification. "I planned to manipulate you. I thought about compelling you or turning you or doing whatever was necessary to keep you in Theo's life, because his life, his actual living, breathing existence depends on you now. But then I made the mistake of talking to you, of watching you with him, of seeing the way you looked at him like he was precious instead of cursed." He took a step toward her, and she took a step back. "I fell in love with you," he said, and the words sounded like they were being torn from him. I fell in love with the way you read to him in different voices, the way you brought vanilla candles because you thought the penthouse was too cold, the way you chose him over your job security and your sleep and your common sense. I fell in love with you, and I cannot do it, cannot take your choice away, even though losing you might mean losing him. Elena was crying now, tears streaming down her face that she did not bother to wipe away. Why me? She asked, and it came out broken. Why did it have to be me? Why did I have to be the one who could break the curse? Lucian looked at her with those ancient eyes that had seen centuries pass, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked lost. I do not know, he said. Maybe because you understand what it is like to lose someone. Maybe because you are capable of loving a monster's child. Maybe because... He stopped and shook his head. Maybe there is no reason. Maybe it was just chance that you were working that night and had a purple scarf and a thermos of hot chocolate. Maybe the universe is not that organized, and you are just unlucky enough to have a kind heart. Elena laughed, and it sounded slightly hysterical even to her own ears. Unlucky, she repeated. You think I am unlucky to have found you? Lucian's face did something complicated. I think you are unlucky to have found us, he said carefully. I think being tied to vampires is dangerous and strange, and will cost you everything you think of as normal life. I think you deserve better than a monster who manipulated you and a cursed child who will break your heart. But I also think, his voice dropped to almost a whisper, I also think that if you can find it in yourself to stay, if you can forgive what I planned and accept what we are, then I will spend eternity trying to be worthy of that gift. He moved to the window, and she could see the tension in every line of his body. I am giving you a choice, he said without turning around. You can leave now, and I will pay you everything I promised and more. I will erase myself from your memory if you want. You can go back to your normal life, or you can stay and save Theo knowing what we are, knowing the danger and the strangeness, stay as human and help him grow, and we will find a way to make it work. Or... He paused and turned to look at her with eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. Or you can stay and become like us. You can let me turn you and be part of this family forever, immortal and together and safe from everything except yourselves. Elena felt like she could not breathe, felt like the walls were closing in because he was offering her everything and nothing, was giving her choices that were not really choices at all, because how could she leave Theo now? How could she abandon this child who had spoken his first word to claim her as his? But the vampire thing was too much, was too strange and impossible, was too far outside anything she had imagined for her life. I need to think, she said, and her voice sounded far away. I cannot, I have to go. She grabbed her coat and bag and ran for the elevator, heard Lucian call her name but did not stop, could not stop because if she stopped, she would make a decision she was not ready to make. The elevator ride down felt like it took hours, and she burst into the lobby gasping for air, into the harsh fluorescent lights and the marble floors and the normal, boring reality of the hotel at midnight. Outside, she could hear church bells ringing and carolers singing and the sounds of a normal Christmas night in a normal city, and she wanted to run out into that normalness and never look back. But then she heard another sound, a small broken sound that froze her in place. She turned to see Theo standing at the base of the grand staircase in his pajamas, with his stuffed wolf clutched to his chest, and he was crying. Tears were streaming down his face, and his whole body was shaking, and he was making these awful hitching sobs that sounded like they were being torn from somewhere deep inside. Please, he said, and his voice was raw. Please, mine. You are mine. Elena felt her heart break completely because she had never seen him cry, had never heard him beg, had not known he was capable of this much emotion. She looked past him to the top of the stairs where Lucian stood watching, and she expected him to come down, expected him to interfere or manipulate or do something, but he just stood there with his hands at his sides giving her the choice he had promised. Elena looked at Theo's tears and remembered Marcus, remembered the way her brother had cried when the social worker had taken him away, remembered the way she had been too young and too powerless to stop it. She remembered every night since then that she had wondered if he was safe, if someone was taking care of him, if he knew that she had not wanted to leave him. She looked at this child who was not really a child, this century-old vampire who had been frozen at 8 and cursed to isolation, and she saw Marcus in his tears, saw every lost child she had never been able to save. "I am not leaving you, baby," she heard herself say, and her feet were moving toward him before she made a conscious decision. "I promise, I am not leaving." Theo crashed into her and wrapped his arms around her waist and sobbed into her stomach. And Elena held him and looked up at Lucian, who was still standing at the top of the stairs. "I am staying," she called up to him. "I am staying for Theo. I am staying because I cannot walk away from him. But I need time. I need time to process what you are and what this means, and I need you to give me that time." Lucian nodded slowly, and she could see the relief and hope and terror warring on his face. "Take all the time you need," he said, and his voice carried clearly down the stairwell. "I will wait centuries if I must. I have done it before. But please." He paused, and she could see him struggling with something. "Please keep seeing him, keep helping him. Even if you decide you cannot forgive me, or be with me, keep helping him grow." Elena nodded because that was the easy part. That was the only part she was certain of. "1 week," she said. "Give me 1 week to decide about the rest, about the immortality and the forever and the being part of your world. But I will keep seeing Theo, I will keep helping him, that is not negotiable." Lucian's smile was small and sad and full of gratitude. 1 week, he agreed. Elena stayed in the lobby with Theo until he stopped crying, until his sobs turned to hiccups, and then to quiet breathing. And she told him stories about her childhood and her brother and all the things she wished she could have done differently. Theo listened and watched her face and held her hand in his cold, small fingers. And when she said she had to go home to sleep, he nodded, but did not let go. "Tomorrow night," she promised. "I will be here tomorrow night and the night after that and the night after that. I am not going anywhere." Theo looked up at her with those gray eyes that were a little less ancient now, a little more like a real 8-year-old, and whispered, "Love you." The words hit her like a physical blow because they were the first unprompted sentence he had ever said, the first emotion he had named, and she pulled him close. "Love you too, baby," she said into his hair. "So much." When she finally left the hotel, the snow was falling thick and soft, covering the city in white silence, and Elena walked home through streets full of Christmas lights and closed shops trying to understand what had just happened to her life. She had learned that vampires were real, that the man she was falling for was an 8-century-old creature who drank blood and could not die, that the child she loved was cursed and frozen and desperately dependent on her continued presence. She had learned all of this, and instead of running, she had chosen to stay, had chosen this impossible family over safety and sanity and everything she thought she knew about the world. In her apartment, she sat on her bed surrounded by the photographs and documents that proved the impossible, and she let herself cry for the normal life she was leaving behind. She cried for the future she had imagined with a regular job and a regular family and regular problems. She cried for the girl she had been, who thought the worst thing that could happen was losing her brother to the foster system. But she also let herself feel the other thing, the terrible, wonderful thing that was growing in her chest despite everything. She let herself feel the love she had for Theo, who called her mine, and cried at the thought of losing her. She let herself feel the complicated pull toward Lucian, who had offered her eternity and meant it. She let herself feel all of it, and then she made a list, because that was what she did when life got overwhelming, made a list of questions and concerns and things she needed to know before she could make any permanent decisions. At the top of the list, she wrote, "What happens if I say yes?" And underneath it, "What happens if I say no?" And then she stared at those two questions until the sun came up on the day after Christmas, and she still did not have any answers except the one that mattered most, the one that had made her turn back in the lobby when Theo was crying. She could not leave him, would not leave him, which meant the only question that really mattered was whether she was brave enough to follow that love, wherever it led. Elena had spent the week living in two worlds, sleeping during the day in her apartment surrounded by books about vampire mythology and folklore, then spending her nights in the penthouse, watching Theo transform from frozen child to living, breathing boy who asked questions and laughed at jokes and had grown a full inch taller in 7 days. She had researched everything she could find about vampirism, had separated the Hollywood fiction from the historical accounts, had learned that sunlight was fatal, and stakes through the heart worked, and yes, they drank blood. But no, they were not soulless monsters. They were just apex predators who happened to look human. She had talked to Lucian during the hours after Theo went to sleep, long conversations in the library where he answered every question she asked with painful honesty, told her about the transformation process that took 3 days of agony, told her about the heightened senses and the strength and the way time felt different when you had eternity to fill. He told her about the politics of vampire society and the clans that ruled different territories and the laws that governed their kind, told her that turning a human required permission from the regional king, which in Boston meant permission from him, so that at least would not be an issue. He told her all of this, and she listened and asked more questions and slowly built a picture of what her life would become if she chose immortality. And the strange thing was that the more she learned, the less afraid she became. The vampire world had rules and structure and community, had art and music, and centuries of accumulated knowledge. And yes, it also had violence and blood and darkness, but Elena was starting to understand that darkness was not the same thing as evil. On December 30th, Theo had called her mom for the first time without prompting, had looked up from the puzzle they were working on and said, "Mom, can we read the book about the rabbit again?" And Elena had burst into tears right there on the library floor. That night she had called her own mother for the first time in 3 years, had endured the awkward, stilted conversation and the recriminations, and finally just said, "I forgive you for leaving. I forgive you for choosing him over me. I am building my own family now, and I wanted you to know that I am happy." Her mother had cried and Elena had cried, and it had not fixed everything, but it had closed a wound she had been carrying since she was 15. Tonight was New Year's Eve, and Elena had made her decision, had spent the day writing down everything she needed to say, because she knew if she did not have notes, she would lose her nerve. She arrived at the penthouse at 11, wearing the nicest dress she owned, a simple black thing she had bought for job interviews, and found Lucian waiting in the library with Theo already asleep in his room. She could hear fireworks starting in the distance, could see them through the windows painting the sky in gold and silver, and she took a deep breath. "I want forever with you both," she said before she could overthink it. "I want to be part of this family, and I am willing to become immortal for it, but I need it to be on my terms." Lucian had gone very still in that vampire way he had, not breathing or blinking, just watching her with those ancient eyes. "Tell me your terms," he said quietly. Elena pulled out her notes with shaking hands. "I want partnership with you, not ownership," she read. "I want you to see me as an equal, even though I will be younger and weaker and newer to this world. I want my opinions to matter and my choices to be respected. I want time to finish my human life business before the turning. I need to find my brother Marcus and make sure he is okay. I need to settle my debts and say proper goodbyes. I want—" She paused because this next part was harder. "I want you to trust me, really trust me, the way you trusted me tonight with the truth. I want you to let me help make decisions about Theo and about our life together." Lucian crossed the room to her and took the paper from her hands, read through her entire list slowly. I have been king for 8 centuries, he said finally. I have never had a partner. I have ruled alone and made decisions alone and trusted no one. But I will learn. If you teach me, I will learn. I want to learn. Elena felt something loosen in her chest. You agree? She asked. To all of it? The partnership, and the waiting, and the trust? Lucian nodded, and then did something she had never seen him do. He knelt in front of her so they were eye to eye. I agree to everything, he said. You are not a subject or a possession. You are the woman I love, and the mother my son chose, and I will spend eternity trying to be worthy of that. Take all the time you need to close out your human life. I will help you find your brother. I will help you with whatever you need. Just promise me that at the end of it you will come back. You will let me turn you and stay with us forever. Elena felt tears streaming down her face, and she did not care. Did not care that her mascara was probably running, or that she was crying on what was supposed to be a happy moment. Because this was happy. This was the happiest she could remember being in years. I promise, she said. I promise I will come back. I promise I choose this. I choose you and Theo, and forever. Lucian stood and pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly. Let herself be held by this creature who was strong enough to crush her, but gentle enough to cradle her like she was precious. He tilted her chin up and looked at her for a long moment. May I kiss you? He asked, and Elena laughed, because he was asking permission like he had not just promised her eternity. Yes, she said. Please, yes. His lips met hers, and the kiss was cold at first, his mouth like ice against hers, but then it warmed and deepened, and Elena felt herself melt into it, felt 800 years of loneliness meet her own desperate need for connection. Outside, the fireworks were exploding in earnest now, midnight approaching, and Lucian kissed her like she was air and he was drowning, kissed her until she forgot to be afraid of what he was, and just remembered that she loved who he was. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard even though he did not technically need to breathe, and Elena touched his face, traced the line of his jaw. Happy New Year, she whispered, and he smiled, really smiled for the first time since she had met him. Happy New Year, he said back. The first of many we will spend together. They stood there wrapped around each other watching the fireworks paint the sky, and Elena thought, this is it. This is the moment everything changes. This is when my new life begins. She had no idea how right she was, or how much blood that new life would cost. The window exploded inward at 11:45, shattered glass and winter air, and something moving too fast for human eyes to track, and suddenly there were bodies in the library, figures in black moving with inhuman speed and grace. Lucian shoved Elena behind him, and she saw his face transform, saw his fangs extend, and his eyes go completely black, saw him become the predator he had been hiding beneath expensive suits and careful manners. Stay behind me, he snarled. And then he was moving, engaging with 3 vampires at once in a fight that was too fast and too brutal for Elena to fully process. She pressed herself against the bookshelf and tried to understand what was happening, tried to make sense of the chaos, and then she saw more figures entering through the broken window, saw a woman with blonde hair and cruel eyes directing them like a general commanding troops. The rival clan, Elena realized with cold clarity. They had come for Theo. She ran for his bedroom, heard Lucian shout her name, but did not stop, burst through the door to find Theo sitting up in bed, clutching his stuffed wolf, looking terrified. We have to go, baby, she said, scooping him up. We have to get you somewhere safe. But before she could make it back to the door, another vampire appeared blocking her path. A male with red eyes and a smile that showed too many teeth. Well, well, he said. The human mother, how touching. Theo made a sound low in his throat, and Elena felt him trembling against her. But then something strange happened. Theo pushed away from her and dropped to the floor, and when he looked up his eyes were the same black as Lucian's, his small fangs visible. Mine, he said, and his voice was different. deeper, dangerous. The vampire laughed and reached for Elena, and Theo moved, actually moved with vampire speed, slammed into the vampire's legs hard enough to knock him off balance. Elena watched in shock as this 8-year-old child fought a creature 10 times his size with strength that should have been impossible, watched him use speed and ferocity to protect her, and she understood that the curse was breaking in real time. That Theo was accessing his vampire nature for the first time in over a century. But he was still small, still child-sized despite the supernatural strength, and the vampire recovered quickly and backhanded Theo hard enough to send him flying into the wall. Elena screamed and ran to him, gathered him up in her arms, and that was when the blonde woman appeared in the doorway. Katerina, Lucian had called her during one of their talks, the leader of the clan that had cursed Theo, the one who had wanted to marry Lucian and unite their territories. "So this is the human who broke the curse," Katerina said, studying Elena like she was an interesting insect. "I must admit, I am impressed. 3 centuries and you managed what no one else could. Pity you will not live to see the results." Elena held Theo tighter and met Katerina's eyes. "You are not touching him," she said, and was surprised by how steady her voice was. Katerina laughed, and it was a beautiful, terrible sound. "Stupid human," she said. "You would die for a monster's whelp?" Elena thought about Marcus, about all the times she had wished someone had protected him, about all the nights she had lain awake wondering if he was safe. She thought about Theo calling her mom and choosing her wolf as his first word, and the way he had tried to protect her with his small vampire strength. "He is not a monster," Elena said clearly. "He is my son." Katerina's smile turned sharp. "Then you can die together," she said, and moved forward with vampire speed, and Elena knew she was about to die, knew there was nothing she could do against this ancient creature. But she was not going to let go of Theo, was not going to fail another child she loved. Except Theo moved first, tore himself from her arms and threw himself at Katerina with a scream that was pure rage. And Katerina caught him easily, and Elena saw the stake in her hand, saw it drive toward Theo's chest, saw it pierce his skin just left of his heart. "No!" Elena screamed, and something in her broke, something primal and fierce that she had not known existed. She saw the fallen vampire's weapon on the floor near her feet, a wooden stake still wet with black blood, and she grabbed it without thinking. Her nursing school training kicked in. Anatomy lessons about heart placement and rib cages, and when Katerina turned to her with Theo bleeding in her arms, Elena did not hesitate. She drove the stake up under Katerina's ribs at the exact angle needed to pierce the heart, drove it home with all her human strength and all her desperate love, and Katerina's eyes went wide with shock. "You," she gasped, and then she was crumbling to ash, vampire bodies disintegrating when truly killed, and Theo fell from her dissolving grip. Elena caught him and felt the wet warmth of his blood, red not black because he was not fully turned, saw the wound in his chest that was too close to his heart, too deep. "Lucian!" she screamed. "Lucian, help me!" She heard fighting in the other room, heard bodies hitting walls and glass breaking, and then suddenly Lucian was there, was kneeling beside them with black blood streaking his face, and his hands shaking as he reached for his son. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no, not him, not after everything." Theo's eyes were fluttering closed and his breathing was wrong, was wet and rattling, and Elena knew that sound from her clinical rotations, knew it meant lung damage, meant dying. "Do something," she begged Lucian. "Turn him, save him, do whatever you have to do." Lucian looked at her with devastation in his eyes. "If I turn him now, he will be 8 forever," he said. "The curse kept him half-turned, kept him able to age if it broke, but if I complete the transformation now, he will never grow tall, never go through puberty, never," his voice broke. "He will be a child eternally." Elena looked down at Theo, who was dying in her arms, at this boy who had called her mom and protected her with everything he had, and she knew there was only one choice that mattered. "He will be alive," she said fiercely. "He will be ours. He will be here and loved, and that is what matters. Do it, Lucian. Save our son. Something in Lucian's face shifted at the word our, and he nodded, bent over Theo and bit his own wrist until black blood welled up. This will hurt, he said, and she did not know if he was talking to Theo or himself. I am so sorry this will hurt. He pressed his wrist to Theo's mouth, and Elena watched vampire blood flow into her dying child, watched Theo convulse and scream, and then go rigid as the transformation took hold. It was nothing like the movies, nothing like the books. It was agony made visible, was every cell in his body dying and remaking itself, and Elena held him through it while Lucian whispered apologies and promises in a language she did not recognize. The other vampires had fled when their leader died, had vanished into the night, and the penthouse was destroyed around them. And dawn was starting to gray the sky in the east, and Theo was screaming himself hoarse in her arms. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Theo went still. Elena thought for one terrible moment that they had lost him, that the transformation had failed, but then his eyes opened, and they were completely black, vampire black, and he took a breath that he no longer needed. "Mom," he said, and his voice was different, clearer, stronger. "Mom, it does not hurt anymore. I can feel everything." Elena sobbed and pulled him close, felt Lucian's arms come around both of them, felt them become a unit forged in blood and terror and love. "We have to go," Lucian said quietly. "Dawn is coming and we are exposed here. I have a sanctuary below the city." He stood and lifted Theo easily, then helped Elena to her feet. She looked around at the destroyed penthouse, at the ash that had been Katerina scattered across the floor, at her own hands still covered in blood both red and black. She had killed someone tonight, had taken a life, and the strange thing was that she did not feel guilty. She felt fierce, felt like she had protected what was hers, and would do it again without hesitation. Lucian was watching her with something like awe. "You saved us," he said. "You saved him when I could not. You killed an ancient vampire to protect our son." Elena met his eyes and saw her own transformation reflected there, saw that she was not the same woman who had wrapped a shivering child in a purple scarf 2 weeks ago. "I told you," she said. "He is mine, you are both mine, and I protect what is mine." Lucian kissed her then, hard and desperate, tasting of blood and smoke. "I love you," he said against her mouth. "I love you, and I will spend forever proving that you made the right choice." They fled the penthouse as dawn broke over Boston, Lucian carrying Theo and Elena following close behind, and she did not look back at the life she was leaving, only forward at the impossible family she had claimed as her own. The sanctuary beneath the Grand Minerva Hotel was nothing like Elena had imagined when Lucian had said the words underground refuge during their desperate flight from the penthouse. She had pictured something crude and utilitarian, concrete tunnels and bare bulbs, the kind of bomb shelter paranoid humans built during the Cold War. Instead, when they had descended through a hidden elevator shaft that dropped 5 stories below the hotel's basement, she had stepped into a cathedral. Gothic arches soared 30 feet overhead, carved from living stone that glowed faintly with some mineral phosphorescence that made the whole space feel like it existed in perpetual twilight. The ceiling was stained glass, but not the kind found in churches. This glass showed stars and constellations that moved slowly across its surface, tracking the real sky above. Some kind of magic Elena did not understand, but found breathtakingly beautiful. The living quarters sprawled out from a central hall, rooms that blended medieval stone with modern comfort, tapestries hanging beside flat-screen televisions, 4-poster beds with memory foam mattresses. Lucian had built this place 300 years ago when he had first come to Boston, had lived here before he felt secure enough to move above ground, and he had maintained it ever since as a refuge and reminder of where he had started. Now it was their sanctuary, while Elena finished her mortal life and prepared for transformation. And she was grateful for its beauty and isolation, because she needed both to process what had happened. She had killed someone. That fact kept circling through Elena's mind during the 6 days following the attack, kept surfacing at odd moments when she was on video calls with her mother, or meeting with the lawyer Lucian had hired to find Marcus, or sorting through her meager possessions, deciding what to keep for her immortal life. She had driven a stake through Katerina's heart and watched an ancient vampire crumble to ash, had taken a life to protect Theo, and the guilt she expected never came. Instead, she felt a fierce satisfaction that surprised and slightly disturbed her, felt like she had finally stopped being a victim of circumstances and become someone who shaped her own fate. Her therapist from college would probably have concerns about that, Elena thought wryly. But her therapist from college had never been cornered by a vampire clan leader threatening to kill an 8-year-old child, so perhaps this situation fell outside standard psychological frameworks. Lucian watched her carefully during those 6 days, clearly worried she would break down or regret her choice, but Elena felt more solid than she had in years. She had spent so long running from violence and trauma, from the guilt of not saving Marcus, and the fear of her stepfather's rages, that finally running toward danger to protect someone felt like reclaiming a part of herself she had thought lost. When she told Lucian this during one of their late-night conversations in the sanctuary library, he had pulled her close and said, "You were never weak, you were surviving. There is nothing weak about survival." But Elena disagreed. Surviving was what she had done before, what she had been doing her whole adult life. This, choosing to become a vampire and join this impossible family and defend them with violence if necessary, this was living. The video call with her mother on January 2nd had been awkward and painful and necessary. Elena had set up her laptop in one of the sanctuary bedrooms and called at a time she knew her mother would be home from her nursing shift. And when her mother's face appeared on screen, Elena had seen how much she had aged in 3 years, how the lines around her eyes had deepened and her hair had gone more gray. They had stared at each other for a long moment before her mother spoke. "You look good," she said finally. "Happy." Elena nodded, felt tears threatening. "I am happy," she said. "I wanted you to know that She paused, "because how did you tell your mother you were about to become an immortal vampire, before I make some major life changes? I am getting married and moving permanently, and I wanted to tell you that I forgive you. For leaving, for choosing him, for not being able to protect us. I understand now that you did the best you could." Her mother had cried then, proper sobbing tears, and said, "I am so sorry, Elena. I am so sorry I left you with Marcus. I should have taken you both, but I was afraid he would find us, and I thought if I just took myself, he would let you go." Elena cried too, and they talked for 2 hours, really talked for the first time since Elena was 15. And by the end, Elena's mother had asked if she could come to the wedding. Elena had said maybe someday, but right now she needed space to build her new life, needed to close this chapter before starting the next, and her mother had understood. They ended the call with "I love yous" that felt fragile but real, and Elena felt something heavy lift from her chest, some old wound finally starting to close. Finding Marcus had been easier than Elena expected, which she supposed made sense given that Lucian had apparently unlimited resources and connections. The lawyer he hired was a vampire herself, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca who specialized in supernatural legal issues, and she had located Marcus within 48 hours. He was alive, he was in college at the University of Vermont, studying environmental science. He had a girlfriend and a part-time job at a climbing gym, and from what Rebecca could determine, he was happy and healthy, and had no memory of their childhood trauma because their mother had gotten him into therapy immediately after leaving, and he had blocked most of it out. Elena looked at the photos Rebecca provided, saw her baby brother grown into a tall young man with their father's dark hair and easy smile, and felt relief so intense it made her dizzy. He was okay. He had escaped their stepfather's violence and their childhood poverty, and he was okay. Rebecca asked if Elena wanted to make contact, and Elena thought about it carefully, thought about what it would mean to walk back into Marcus's life after 15 years, thought about the fact that she was about to become an immortal vampire and could never fully explain her life to him. In the end, she decided on a compromise. She would maintain distant contact as a family friend, would set up a trust fund that would pay his college tuition and support him financially without him knowing where it came from, would watch over him from the shadows for the rest of his mortal life. It was not the reunion she had dreamed of, but it was what Marcus needed, and Elena was starting to understand that love sometimes meant letting go instead of holding tight. When she told Lucian her decision, he had kissed her forehead and said, "You are a better person than I am." I would have dragged him into my life, regardless of whether it was good for him. Elena had laughed and said, "That is because you are 800 years old and used to getting what you want. I am still learning to think beyond my own needs." Theo had changed dramatically in the 6 days since his transformation, and watching him develop was like watching time-lapse footage of a flower blooming. The curse breaking had apparently unlocked not just his vampire abilities, but his entire developmental trajectory, and he was mentally catching up to his physical age at an accelerated rate. On the first day after the attack, he spoke in full complex sentences for the first time, asked Elena questions about why the sky was blue and how airplanes flew and whether vampires could go to space. By the third day, he was reading at a second-grade level and had strong opinions about which superhero was strongest and why broccoli was disgusting even though he no longer needed to eat food. By the sixth day, he was playing elaborate imaginary games with his stuffed wolf and the other toys Lucian kept bringing him, was showing empathy and humor and creativity that had been locked away for over a century. He still looked 8 years old, and always would, still had the same dark curls and solemn eyes, but behind those eyes was finally a real developing child instead of a frozen ghost. He called Lucian Dad now without prompting, called Elena Mom in a way that sounded natural and easy. And sometimes she would catch him just staring at them both like he could not quite believe they were real. The nightmares had started on the second night, terrors about being alone again or about Elena dying, and she and Lucian took turns sitting with him until he fell back asleep. "It's normal," Lucian assured her when she worried. "He is processing 130 years of trauma in the span of a week. He is entitled to nightmares." Elena supposed he was right, but it still broke her heart every time Theo woke up screaming. By January 6th, Elena had finished everything she needed to finish as a mortal. Her debts were paid, her lease terminated, her few valuable possessions stored in the sanctuary, her mother reconciled with, her brother located and provided for. Her goodbyes said to the handful of acquaintances she had accumulated during her years in Boston. She had quit her job at the hotel in person, had told her supervisor Marla that she was getting married and moving abroad, had accepted Marla's shocked congratulations, and promised to send postcards she would never actually send. She had walked through the city one last time in daylight, had stood in the common watching parents push children on swings and joggers run past, and people live their ordinary human lives, had said a silent goodbye to the woman she had been. That evening, she returned to the sanctuary and found Lucian waiting in the central hall, looking nervous in a way she had never seen him look before. "Are you certain?" he asked without preamble. "This is irreversible, Elena. Once I turn you, there is no going back. You will be vampire forever, and you will outlive every human you have ever known, and you will have to drink blood to survive." Elena crossed to him and took his hands, felt how carefully he was controlling his strength to avoid crushing her mortal bones. "I am certain," she said. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Lucian closed his eyes. "Promise me something," he said. "If you lose yourself during the transformation, if you become someone else, promise you will let me help you find your way back." Elena smiled. "I cannot lose myself," she said. "I know exactly who I am now. I am the woman who chose this family and this life, and I will not forget that, no matter how much my body changes. The turning ritual was beautiful and terrifying, and nothing like Elena had imagined. Lucian had prepared one of the sanctuary bedrooms, had covered the bed with white sheets, and surrounded it with candles that filled the space with soft golden light. Theo sat in the corner, clutching his wolf and watching with wide, serious eyes, and Lucian explained that he wanted to be present but would leave if it became too difficult to witness. Elena told him to stay, told him this was a family moment, and she wanted him to see her choose them. Lucian had researched the ritual carefully, had consulted with other vampire kings about the best practices, and he walked Elena through what would happen. First he would feed from her, would drink her blood until she was near death. Then he would feed her his blood, and the transformation would begin. It would take 3 days, and it would be agonizing, every cell in her body dying and remaking itself as something new, and she would likely scream and convulse and beg for it to stop, but he could not stop it once started, or she would die permanently. After 3 days, she would wake as vampire, would be immortal and powerful and bound to him for eternity. "Do you understand?" he asked. Elena said yes and meant it. They had decided to do the turning at dawn, symbolic timing that appealed to Lucian's sense of poetry, and as the stained glass ceiling began to lighten with approaching sunrise, Elena lay down on the white sheets and looked up at him. "I love you," she said. "I trust you. Do not be afraid to hurt me, if that is what this requires." Lucian's hands were shaking as he knelt beside the bed. "I love you," he said. "I will be here when you wake, I promise." The pain when he bit her neck was sharp and bright, and then faded into something almost pleasant. A floating, dizzy feeling as her blood flowed out of her body. Elena felt her heartbeat slowing, felt her vision starting to tunnel, felt herself sliding toward darkness. Just before she lost consciousness, she heard Theo's voice saying, "I love you, Mom." And she tried to smile, but was not sure if her face obeyed. Then there was nothing for a while, a black space that felt like falling. And then Lucian's wrist was at her mouth, and he was saying, "Drink. Elena, please drink." And she tasted something cold and metallic and wrong. Her body rejected it instinctively, tried to turn away, but Lucian held her firmly and said, "You have to drink, love. You have to finish this." And Elena forced herself to swallow. The pain started immediately, a fire in her veins that spread from her mouth through her entire body. And she heard herself screaming but could not stop. Every nerve was burning, every cell rearranging itself, her human body dying and her vampire body being born from its ashes. She was dimly aware of Lucian holding her down as she convulsed, aware of Theo crying in the corner, aware of time passing in pieces she could not quite connect. Sometimes she surfaced enough to beg Lucian to make it stop, and he would whisper, "I cannot. I am sorry, I cannot." Sometimes she hallucinated her stepfather's face, or Marcus crying or her mother leaving. Sometimes she forgot who she was entirely and existed only as pain. 3 days passed like this, 3 days of agony and darkness, and Lucian's voice anchoring her to reality. When Elena finally woke on the morning of January 9th, the first thing she noticed was silence. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of sounds she had never heard before, sounds her human ears had not been capable of processing. She could hear Theo's heartbeat from 3 rooms away, a steady the thump that filled her with joy, because he had not had a heartbeat before the transformation. The curse had kept his heart still. She could hear Lucian breathing, even though he did not need to breathe, could hear the blood moving through his veins, and the almost inaudible hum of electricity in the walls, and water running through pipes somewhere far below. She could smell everything, the stone and candle wax, and Lucian's skin, and Theo's shampoo, and her own changed scent that was sharper now, predatory. When she opened her eyes, the candlelight was not dim anymore. She could see every detail of the room in perfect clarity. could count the threads in the sheets, and see dust motes floating in the air. Lucian was sitting in a chair beside the bed looking exhausted and relieved and hopeful, and when he saw her eyes open, he made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Elena," he said, "welcome back." Elena tried to sit up and moved too fast, found herself standing beside the bed before she consciously decided to move. Everything was faster and stronger and more intense, and she looked down at her hands and saw they were pale now, vampire pale, saw her nails had sharpened slightly. "I can hear his heartbeat," she said, and her voice sounded different, clearer. "Theo, I can hear his heart beating. It was not beating before." Lucian smiled, and it was incandescent. "The curse," he said. "It is fully broken now. He is alive in every way. He is growing normally mentally, and his vampire abilities are developing. He is everything we hoped." The next month passed in a blur of learning and adjustment and unexpected joy. Lucian taught Elena how to use her vampire abilities, how to control her strength so she did not accidentally crush things, how to move with supernatural speed without crashing into walls, how to retract her fangs and manage her bloodlust. He brought her ethically sourced blood from a vampire-run blood bank and taught her to drink it without feeling guilty, explained that most modern vampires did not kill humans to feed, and that the murderous stereotypes were outdated. He introduced her to other vampires in the Boston community, powerful ancient creatures who treated her with respect because she was Lucian's bonded partner and because she had killed Katerina, which apparently was impressive even by vampire standards. They performed a formal bonding ceremony on January 15th, a vampire ritual that was part wedding and part blood oath, and Rebecca the lawyer filed legal documents listing Elena and Lucian as married and as Theo's parents. Lucian gave Elena the Grand Minerva Hotel as a bonding gift, transferred ownership to her name, and told her she could manage it however she wished, could turn it into whatever she wanted it to be. Elena had cried and said, "You are giving me the place where we met." And Lucian had said, "I am giving you your own domain because you are not my subject. You are my partner and you deserve power of your own." Elena decided to keep running the hotel but made changes, hired more staff and raised wages, and started a program to provide jobs for people struggling with addiction or homelessness. Used the business to help people the way she wished someone had helped her. Theo thrived in a way that was miraculous to witness. By the end of January, he was mentally and emotionally at a typical 8-year-old level, was reading chapter books and doing math problems and asking if he could learn piano. Other vampire families started visiting the sanctuary now that Lucian's curse was broken, started bringing their own vampire children to play with Theo, and the community that had shunned Lucian for centuries welcomed him back. Watching Theo play with other kids was surreal and wonderful, watching him laugh and argue and make friends, watching him be a normal child despite the supernatural circumstances. He still had the purple scarf Elena had given him that first night, kept it folded carefully in his room, and sometimes slept with it when he had nightmares. He still called her mom with wonder in his voice sometimes, like he could not quite believe she was real and staying. Elena had framed a photo from the night they met, a security camera still showing her wrapping the scarf around his shoulders, and hung it in the hotel lobby with a small plaque that said, "Where it all began." The lobby couch where Theo had fallen asleep that first night was now a display piece, roped off with another plaque explaining that this was where the king found his family. Guests thought it was romantic mythology, had no idea it was literal truth. On Valentine's Day, exactly 1 month after Elena's transformation, and 6 weeks after that first meeting in the lobby, the three of them stood in the Grand Minerva Hotel at midnight, watching vampire children play. Elena wore her old maid uniform as a joke, the same black dress and white apron she had been wearing when she first saw Theo shivering by the fireplace, and Lucian had his arm around her waist in a possessive gesture that she found endearing rather than controlling now because she knew he would let go the instant she asked. The hotel was decorated for Valentine's Day with red roses and heart-shaped balloons and a chocolate fountain that the vampire children were fascinated by, even though they could not eat chocolate anymore. Theo was playing an elaborate game of tag with 5 other kids, was shrieking with laughter as he dodged around furniture with supernatural speed. A little girl named Maya, who was from a shapeshifter clan, allied with Lucian's vampires, was chasing him, and watching them play together was watching 2 supernatural creatures just be kids. Do you regret it? Lucian asked quietly. Any of it. The transformation or the violence, or giving up sunlight and mortality. Elena thought about her answer carefully, thought about everything she had lost and everything she had gained. I regret not finding you both sooner, she said finally. I regret the years I spent alone and afraid when I could have been here building this life. I regret that I cannot see Marcus grow up in person or reconcile fully with my mother. But the choice itself, becoming vampire and joining this family, no, I do not regret that at all. We have forever now, and that is enough. Theo ran over to them then, grabbed both their hands with his small, cold fingers. Mom, Dad, he said, and Elena still got a thrill hearing those words in his voice. Maya's clan has puppies. Well, not puppies exactly, they are shapeshifter cubs, but they are so cute and her mom said we could adopt one if you say yes. Can we get a puppy? I promise I will take care of it and walk it and everything. Elena looked at Lucian and saw him trying not to laugh. Sweetheart, she said to Theo, you know those are werewolf babies, right? They are not actually puppies, they are children who can turn into wolves. Theo nodded enthusiastically. I know, he said. That is the cool part. We can play together in human form and wolf form, and it will be so fun, please Mom, please Dad. Lucian looked at Elena with an expression that clearly said this is your decision, partner. Elena thought about it. Thought about how adding more chaos to their impossible family was probably insane. Thought about how happy Theo looked, and how this was exactly the kind of normal childhood request she had hoped he would someday make. Okay, she said. Yes, we can get a shapeshifter cub, but you have to help take care of it, and you have to be gentle because it will be smaller than you. Theo screamed with joy and hugged them both and then ran back to tell Maya the good news. Elena leaned into Lucian's embrace and looked around the hotel lobby, at the vampire families chatting and the children playing and the fire crackling in the fireplace. We are actually doing this, she said wonderingly. We are actually raising a vampire child together and running a hotel and apparently adopting a werewolf baby. Lucian kissed the top of her head. We are, he agreed, and we have eternity to figure out what comes next. Outside the hotel windows, snow was falling over Boston, covering the city in white. Inside the lobby was warm and alive with laughter and love. Theo was showing Maya's mother exactly where the cub could sleep in his room, was already planning elaborate games they would play. Lucian was holding Elena like she was precious and permanent, like he still could not quite believe she had chosen to stay. And Elena, former maid and recovering addict and lost girl who had spent her whole life running from violence, looked at her impossible family and felt something she had not felt in 15 years. She felt home. Not the place, but the feeling, the knowledge that she belonged somewhere and was loved and would never be alone again. The curse was broken, the child was saved, the king had found his partner, and the maid who had shown compassion to a shivering boy had been rewarded with forever. It was not the ending Elena had imagined when she wrapped her purple scarf around Theo's shoulders 6 weeks ago, but it was so much better than anything she could have dreamed. They had forever now, all 3 of them, and they would spend it together.